Chapter 14. A week later, school let out for the year. Before our first BC meeting of summer vacation, we had a party in Claudia's room. We were all gabbing, laughing, and feeling great. Even Christy was in a loose and slightly wild mood. But the second the clock turned to 5:30, she came no-nonsense Christy again. The rest of us did the best we could to calm down, too. Ring! I picked up the phone. Hello, BabySitters Club. It was Mrs. Lazar asking for a sitter for the following afternoon. I hope you're free to sit, Dawn, she said. Sandra's especially requesting you. I liked sitting for her, I told Mrs. Lazar, but I know that Sandra will like the other sitters in the club too. We'll check the schedule and call you right back to tell you which sitter will be taking the job. I secretly hoped it would be me. As it turned out, Claudia and I were both free to sit the next afternoon, but since the Lazars were new clients and they'd asked for me, we decided that I should take the job. The next day after lunch, I walked to the Lazarses. Sandra opened the door. Hi, Dawn, she said. Did you tell the other kids about the television cooking show? Sure I did, I answered. It was a huge success with these 3 kids I sit for. Their names are Buddy, Susie, and Maureen Barnett. We made microwave pizza. Buddy really hammed it up for make-believe cameras. Did you tell them it was my idea? Sandra asked. Absolutely. We went into the kitchen where Mrs. Lazar was clearing up after lunch. I'll be at the Audubon Society office, she said. I left the number next to the phone on my desk. Can we cook something? Sandra asked. We like to pretend we're on television. You already had lunch, Mrs. Lazar answered as she finished her cleanup. I was hoping you'd play out of doors. It's such a beautiful day. Maybe we could pretend cook. I told Sandra, since we're on pretend television, we could do it in the yard. And we could make a sign with the name of a show. You could do drawings on it. I have a new set of magic markers in my kit. Dawn, you have the best ideas, Sandra said. She certainly does, Mrs. Lazar said. She gave her daughter a hug. But first, Miss Television Cook, a half hour of reading, okay? Oh, all right, Sandra said. But can it be a book from the kit? That'd be fine. You and Dawn can take turns reading. She looked at me to be sure I understood that Sandra should do some of the reading herself. I smiled and nodded. After Mrs. Lazar left, Sandra and I headed for the backyard with my kit and the kitchen timer. The timer was Sandra's idea. She wanted to be sure that she didn't spend 1 second more than 30 minutes reading. We settled ourselves at the picnic table, and I took out an easy-to-read book from the kit. Sandra set the timer for 30 minutes. When she saw the book I'd put in front of us on the table, she said, That's a Magdalene book. I know that story. I read it already. Me too, I said. Madeline books were my favorites, and I still have to read them. I smiled at Sandra. Sometimes it's easier to read a book when you know the story already. Okay, she said. Your start. I'll point to the words as I read, I said, and you follow along. After a few pages, I said, Now it's your turn. Poor Sandra. She struggled with every word. I coaxed her and made encouraging comments, but she was miserable and kept asking how many minutes were left. I would have turned the reading session into a math session about how to read a timer, but I promised Sandra's mother that we'd stuck with the book. Even a dummy could read this book, Sandra said sadly. I can't even read a word with 3 letters. She slammed the book shut. I'm the dumbest kid in my class. I'll never learn to read. I put my arm around her shoulder. Don't get discouraged, Sandra. It has nothing to do with smart or dumb. It's a special problem. You'll work on your reading all summer, and doing second grade over is going to be a big help too. The instant the words were out of my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. The look on Sandra's face told me that she didn't know she would be repeating second grade. I'm going to be in the third grade, she said hesitantly. I was already in second grade. Right, I said. I remember now. The timer went off, so we're finished with reading. I said cheerfully, it's time for television cooking. What should we do first? Cook? Make the sign? Or make up a theme song for the show? What's a theme song? Sandra asked in a quiet voice. It's the song they play at the beginning and end of a television show, I said. For example, Sesame Street has a theme song. I started singing the Sesame Street theme song and pretending I was singing it for a big audience. Soon Sandra joined in. Then we made up lyrics for the Easy TV cooking show. We sang it with gestures to illustrate the words. Sandra was having fun. I hoped with all my heart that she had forgotten what I said about her repeating second grade. Sandra was drawing pictures on the Easy TV cooking show sign when I saw that Mrs. Lazar was home. Your mom's here, I said. Let's sing the theme song for her. Sandra jumped up from the table and ran across the yard to her mother, calling, Mommy, Mommy, Dad said I have to go to second grade again. My heart sank. I'd been found out, and I'd upset Sandra. Mrs. Lazar squatted down to her daughter's height and said quietly, Go up to your room, honey, and I'll be right there to talk to you, okay? Sandra ran inside without looking back at me. I met Mrs. Lazar halfway across the yard. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I assume you found the letter from the school, she said gravely. I nodded. We weren't planning on telling Sandra and that she's repeating second grade until a few days before school starts in the fall. She spoke quietly, but I could hear the anger in her voice. Sandra is a real worrier, and there's a lot for her to worry about in this situation. She'll be separated from her friends, and she'll be working with a special tutor. She's not going to understand that repeating second grade is good for her until she's experienced it. Now she has all summer to think about it and worry. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sure you are, Mrs. Lazar said, but that won't make it any easier for Sandra, will it? No. I was feeling so ashamed and upset that I don't even remember being paid or leaving or anything else except that I probably said, I'm sorry, about a dozen times. I didn't tell a soul that I'm done to Sandra. The only good thing about it was that I learned a session about snooping and people's right to their privacy. It was a lesson I never forget, that I knew that I'd never do anything like that again. I only wish that I hadn't made life even harder for a little girl who was already having a difficult time. Besides being ashamed, I was afraid that Mrs. Lazar would call the BSC and complain about me, and I'd be kicked out of the club. Every time the phone rang during the next few meetings, I felt my heartbeat jump. Mrs. Lazar never called the BC again, either to complain or to hire a sitter. We had a lot of new clients that summer, and no one seemed to notice that we'd lost one. No one but me.